Bob, thank you very much for the honor, and thank you all for supporting this first annual gratitude dinner this evening. And Joyce, thank you for your very kind introduction. Joyce is going to retire from DTE Energy at the end of this year, and I will be following her just a couple of months later. And I want you to know it's been a great privilege and joy for me to work and serve with Joyce and our DTE Energy family, which is a very special family. When Bob and Dan Crickbaum and Victor Begg all got on the phone and asked if I would be willing to keynote this evening, I was surprised, and believe me, it took all three of them over a lengthy conversation to convince me to do this. You see, I was trained to be a lawyer and spent a good share of my professional life in elected politics, credentials that do not usually inspire gratitude. In fact, Bob's call also reminded me of a morning nearly 25 years ago when I was on the receiving end of a monthly radio call-in show in the Holland, Michigan legislative district that I represented. Because callers would often air their complaints about politicians and our government, imagine my surprise that morning when a woman called and started out saying, "Young man, you are doing a wonderful job serving the city of Holland, and I hope you continue to represent us for a long time to come." I responded, "Thank you, ma'am, and thanks especially for addressing me, young man, as I just turned 40 and am feeling a little sensitive about my age." "Oh," she responded, "I'm talking to the wrong person." Live radio is a wonderful thing. Well, hoping that the Interfaith Council hasn't repeated the caller's mistake, permit me to explain why I feel honored, truly, to speak this evening. In short, I deeply admire what the Council represents. Leaders of different religious faiths coming together to celebrate both their own and our region's diversity. Leaders who are fostering understanding, closing opportunity gaps, and tearing down barriers that have obstructed our thinking. Leaders acting as one interfaith community and one regional community. I grew up in a Christian home and believe that God is the source of all creation, the center of our being, and the force of unconditional love. For me, the pathway to becoming one with our Creator has been Christianity and the spirit and ministry of Jesus in my life. But I've also come to believe there are other pathways to the fullness of being, pathways reflected by the diversity of faiths represented on the Leadership Council. I also believe what the Council practices, that is, faith-based convictions mean little if they are not woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. What we decide and how we act usually are matters of relationships, and yes, politics. I describe politics as the process that occurs whenever two or more people are trying to transform diversity and conflict into consensus. In the family, at our places of worship, at work and play, we engage in politics. The question for us is not, should we engage in it? The question is, how will we become engaged? As important as government and public policy are to building stronger communities, our individual, collective attitudes and beliefs, our culture, are even more important. Southeast Michigan remains one of the nation's most racially segregated regions. This segregation is manifest by where we live and, yes, worship, and by wide gaps in our family income, educational attainment, even our health status and life expectancy. We cannot simply legislate a change in our culture. Rather, as individuals and institutions, we must more openly address barriers of prejudice and discrimination and work intentionally to become more welcoming. In the Plymouth-Canton area where our family lives, an Interfaith Council partner, the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion, launched a series of community conversations about our fast-changing ethnic, racial, and religious mix. At the first meeting, those of us who are Anglo-Americans described our towns with self-congratulatory adjectives like accepting and inclusive. The tone of our conversation changed as we listened to the results of focus groups of minority students in our schools and ethnic newcomers in our neighborhoods. What we heard were stories about racial and ethnic harassment and stereotyping in school corridors and classrooms. Stories about police pullovers for no other reason than the driver's skin color having triggered suspicion. Eventually, we turned to the hard questions. Could we truly be an inclusive community if governing boards, school staffs, and public safety forces did not begin to reflect our growing diversity? As we succeed in tearing down these cultural barriers, I believe that good public policy can and will more readily follow. Joyce mentioned that presently I'm chairing the board of the Regional Transit Authority of Southeast Michigan, an organization authorized late last year by the legislature. After 23 failed attempts over 4 decades, we finally have a regional body with a mandate to coordinate local public transit services and connect the 4-county area with rapid transit service. Our board reflects the support of the region's political leadership for improved public transportation, a spirit of cooperation that was necessary before regional transit legislation could be enacted and will be necessary for it to take root. When we complete our master planning and take a proposal to the region's voters for funding support, one of our messages will be that more state and federal transit dollars for Southeast Michigan will depend on the region stepping up and doing better than the $87 per capita our metro area spends today on public transit, compared to the U.S. metropolitan peer average of $292 per capita. But this should not only be a question about taxes and per capita spending. Today, only 22% of the jobs in Southeast Michigan are accessible by a bus ride of less than 90 minutes. Yet too many economically disadvantaged families, senior citizens, and persons with disabilities don't have ready access to personal vehicles and must rely on an inadequate public transportation system to cope with our job sprawl. Our faith community can play a key role helping citizens to consider the social and economic importance of the decision we will make about the future of transit in our region. It is also an opportunity for us to think about employing transportation policy that can connect, bring together a region which in past decades used transportation to spread out and become more segregated. Permit me to sum up my message with a personal story. A few years ago, our daughter Sarah, then a junior at the University of Michigan, signed up for the school's Detroit semester. She lived on the Wayne State University campus, participated in urban studies classes, and interned at Focus Hope. At the end of the term, Sarah and her classmates reported on their internship experiences to a group of teachers and parents. Their stories were a mixture of humor, sadness, and triumph. Stories of idealism bumping up against the painful realities of urban poverty. After their presentations, the students answered our questions. When it was my turn, I asked them, after what you've experienced in Detroit, are you optimistic about the city's future? And if so, why? Following an awkward silence, a voice in the back of the room answered, I am optimistic. What newspaper stories and television newscasts don't often report are the wonderful people I've met. People who are working every day to improve their neighborhoods, their city, their lives. As I turned to hear that beautiful response, I realized that the voice of hope was Sarah's. In that moment, our daughter reminded me that the future of Detroit and our region will depend on each of us, how we relate to each other, how we engage in shaping our institutions, how we advocate and act on just public policy. Thanks again for giving me this opportunity to share, and thank you again for your support of this event.